Today it's part 2 of a 3-part series of shows as we are counting down the top 12 shows of 2023. Last week it was 12 down to 9, and this week we'll work down the list from 8 down to number 5 as we'll hit on subjects that include the cattle market, also addressing issues about the next generation coming back to the ranch, the global beef supply outlook, and skills needed for ranch managers. That's all on today's show as we're counting down the top 12 shows of 2023. It's 8 through 5 on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. It's good to have you with us on our program. As you heard there in the opening, we are counting down the top 12 shows of the year. I always think about whenever I hear a top 12 or a top show countdown, I always think growing up and listening to country music on the radio, and on Sunday afternoons, we would always hear the top 40 country countdown with Bob Kingsley. And I'm by no means even close to that caliber of radio personality, but nevertheless, that's what I think about in this. And we're doing that here with the Working Ranch Radio Show. We're looking back over the year and looking at all of the shows that we put out there, a lot of great shows, and it was tough to narrow it down to the top 12 shows, but we did that, and by no means does it mean the ones that are not on this list weren't valuable to listen to, because it was, like I said, it was really hard. And we basically did this by looking at the total first week downloads to total monthly downloads and then their total downloads to date. And one of the things I had mentioned last week, we've actually seen tremendous growth in this last year of first week downloads and shows. When we started over a year ago, we were seeing about 1,000 first week downloads per show. Now we're up to about 2,000 first week downloads. So we had to take that into perspective. And one of the shows that we're going to talk about today was one of the shows we started and kicked off 2023. It's made the list. We're going to talk about it here today. And it was also one of the shows that was kind of the catalyst in helping see our show see some exponential growth. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But let's get right into it. Last week, I'll just recap just a little bit here before we get started into show ranked number 8. But last week, we started with 12, worked down to 9. And I'll just recap those for you just a little bit. The show that ranked 12th for 2023 was episode 128 with Steve Cody, as we talked with him about getting a herd started correctly. Then in episode 130, which aired in August, that was on Ranch Succession Plan, Your Legacy, a great interview that we had with Dan Childs of the Noble Research Institute. Episode 103, Raising Kids on the Ranch with Alan Crockett, aired in January of last year. That was the show ranked number 10. Also a show that was one of those in the early parts of last year that really projected and pushed the numbers of our show out there. A lot of popularity with that show. And then episode 145 is what we finished out with last week. It aired in December of this year. It was a Perspective with Dr. Neville Spear, for just addressing a lot of different issues for a lot of us in the cattle business. A great conversation with Dr. Neville Spear. Very, very interesting, very informative with that, and that was episode 145. So with that, let's get started. Here is the show ranked number 8. It was airing on September 30th, and it was episode 137. It was with a guest that we've had on our show from time to time. I always enjoy visiting with him. Clint Berry of Superior Livestock out of Justin, Texas, joined us as we talked about, the title of that show was You Can Smell It Coming, and we were talking about the outlook of the fall cattle market. Let's drop in and take a listen to part of that show. Again, it was episode 137. You Can Smell It Coming, Outlook on the Fall Cattle Market with Clint Berry, our 8th ranked show in 2023.
We're still going to be in an incredibly high market as compared to when they were marketing calves the year before. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that changing whatsoever. I think it's going to be a strong fall run again. Those prices are going to continue because we're just too short of cattle overall. You know, when you're looking at what's going into the pen space and what's going to be on feed for the coming year, we're just short of calves. And that's that's the primary driver in the entire marketplace. We're enjoying great beef demand. Don't get me wrong, both domestic and export wise. And, that's credited to producers raising better cattle, making better beef. That's credited to, the export programs and checkoff programs and everything that's been done to capture more dollar from the consumer and to deliver a more consistent product. But, and we're enjoying the fact that while that's there, but we're also into a short supply. And that's the primary driving factor right now. And everyone that stayed in the cattle business is going to be able to capture and enjoy that.
Clint, we left off and we were going to be talking more on the female side of things. Let's start with these young heifers, and we'll just briefly hit that because we know that's going to correlate a little bit with the steers that we were talking about a bit ago. Are we still seeing that big gap? I think anywhere it's been 20 to maybe 25 cents, 50, in there in the past several years on these heifers behind the steers. Is that gap still there? Is what you're seeing this year?
Yeah, at least on our data, what we saw as the summer run went on and we sold the majority of the cattle that we market through Superior, from mid-June to mid-September, we were seeing little pressure on the open heifer calves, open weaned heifer calves as replacement values. And what I mean by that is, typically a female is going to be worth, roughly a number in hard money is like $20 back. Some will be more, some will be less. But if you think about it, heifers typically sell somewhere around that $20 a hundredweight less in an operating market. And a lot of producers think, well, it's the same thing when you pull the hides off. And yes, that's true. In general, the genetics are the same, but the machine that you have, in essence, the animal itself, the factory you have is different because heifers, number one, they're not as efficient as a steer, so their average daily gain is always going to be less. And then two is heifers always hang less carcass weight because they're smaller by nature, just like a male and a female. That's just the way, God created it. So heifers always, as a feeder, a heifer is an inferior animal to its steer mate. Now that doesn't mean that your heifers aren't better than that guy's steers or vice versa. It just means that all things being equal, in general, heifers are a little less efficient. And so they sell for, somewhere in that, say, $20 a hundred back range. And we saw that pretty consistent through the summer. Occasionally you'd have a set that you could tell somebody was jumping out on and buying, and they're going to develop them into bred heifers that might bring steer price or better. But overall, that gap remained pretty consistent. 15 to 25 is dang sure the fair number there that we saw throughout the summer. And that tells us, that's a great indicator to tell us if we've got pressure from a replacement standpoint on building this cow herd. And what those numbers tell us, for everybody that's staying in the business and are marketing calves, that pushes that time frame of adding calves back to the calf crop out for another year. So when people start talking about, well, how many years are we going to enjoy this market under the current fundamentals, what that's saying is we're not rebuilding this year. Wow. We're going to be at least another year out. So before we start retaining females and start adding, production units back into the overall cow herd, to add calves back into the calf crop, going to the pens and the feed yard, we're another year out that much farther. And so you can do the math and start to figure out when your open heifers start calving and you actually get those calves to the weaning pen, and that pushes that market out for another year. And I think that's a critical factor to watch for. And that's not an uncommon thing if you think about it, just from a business standpoint. Most of us require capital to operate. We're not blessed with the fact that we've got a huge amount of cash sitting in the bank account. And we've had some awful tough years last several, especially depending on what part of the country you're in. We've had operating notes that have ran longer and higher than what we wanted. We've dealt with drought. We've dealt with high feed prices. We've dealt with higher interest rates on all of that operating capital. And so it's not uncommon that we've got to cash some of these animals out and reap the benefit of this higher market to get square on the red and black line on our profit loss statements before we can reinvest again. And I think that's a big portion of what you see. And it's not uncommon why traditionally every year the replacement market is the last market for an uptake in the cattle business. When we start to bump prices on calves, we start to bump prices on the live cattle, on the finished cattle, fat cattle. The last thing to come in is the bred stock market, the replacement female market is how I should probably say that correctly. But that's the last, because of the cash flow scenario where, the average rancher needs to get his hands on that, square himself up, and then he can reinvest it looking to add to his business model.
Okay, let's talk on this bred market, because that is the other big element that I know is a lot of guys are thinking about a little bit here. And we're still a ways off before this bred market really is going to heat up. But boy, there's going to be some value in these bred cattle, I'm guessing.
Yeah, you can smell it coming. It's like when you walk in and then your grandma's making cornbread. You can smell it before you get in the door, and you can see it's coming, especially because of the lack of pressure on the open heifers. And I think if you look at the immediate bred stock market, I think the best value in the game is a young bred cow or a high quality bred heifer right now. Mm-hmm. And I think if a guy's knowing he's going to be adding cattle to his program to be bumping his numbers up, it's a great time to get aggressive right now, because there's absolutely no fundamental number out there that shows that we're not going to put value on these heifers. Mm-hmm. To what extent, or these females, I should say, to what extent, I'm not sure that any of us can accurately say it, but there's no way this trend's not going to follow as we move into the end of the year, which is traditionally when we take the bump on the cattle anyway. Guys start to get their calves sold. If they're farmers too, they get their crop in the bin, start to get some cows preg checked, and they know what their numbers are, and they start facing Uncle Sam at the end of the year. And they're going to reinvest some of their equity and add back to the herd, especially in a positive market like that. And I absolutely see us doing that as we move into November and December toward the end of the year here like normal. I think some of these special cow sales are really going to they're going to set the world on fire with some of these good young cattle that are going to be available. I've seen some prices. It's hard to really square it down because there just hasn't been enough trade to justify. But I've seen some prices on the better end bred heifers and young cows from, maybe $2,750 to $3,250. Mm-hmm. I'd say that'd catch a big majority of them, just to put that in numbers. Well, if we're selling $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, even $1,800 calves, that's a pretty good bargain. Mm-hmm. And it also tells you why it's hard to hold on to an open heifer. If you're selling open heifers at $1,500 to $1,700 and you can buy a bred for $1,000 more, the math does not show that you can raise that open into a bred and get her to that status ready to have a calf. Just as long as you also include the opportunity time of how you're going to, in essence, have another calf in this higher market to sell out of that bred than you did as an open. And, that's going to fit everybody's program to what they want to do. But it's a great time if you want to upgrade some cows. It's a great time if you can move quickly to buy maybe some better genetics and add to your herd that advances you that much faster, while you're also increasing your bull power. But I'm excited to see where this is going to go. Usually that number's, you learn over the years that number's somewhere between 2.5 and 3 calves is the value of a bred stock animal. And like I said, if you do the math on what we've been selling some calves for, that we're not there right now. It's a great time. It seems like a great big number buying a female, but the margin, the math, the equation says it makes sense.
And again, that was just a portion of that great conversation that Clint Berry or Superior Livestock and I had as we were talking about the outlook on the fall cattle market. It was episode 137 that aired in September. Now, as you heard there, not only were we talking about that fall run, but also even projecting into 2024. So still some great information that is in that program, and I encourage you to go back and listen to that. Episode 137, ranked number 8 for 2023. Well, coming up after the break, we're going to get to the show ranked number 7. It was the show that kicked off 2023, and the title alone spurred enough interest to make people want to go listen to it, and it was a great program to boot. And also, coming up later in the show, while we'll continue working down our list, we'll also have the Captain Tim O'Byrne stopping in with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and meteorologist Don Day giving us a look at our long-term weather. There's a lot happening here on today's episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show.
There are lots of nutrition tubs out there, but none can match the true blue commitment of Vitalix. Our tubs offer you the most concentrated nutrition at the lowest cost per day. That means more profit for your operation and improved performance for your cow herd. In fact, research shows Vitalix tubs increase feed efficiency by 20% while boosting conception rates, herd health, and weaning weights. Learn more at Vitalix.com. Vitalix, the true blue tub.
And this is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. We welcome you back here for the program. I don't know why I didn't mention this right off, and I have to apologize. But first of all, as this program is airing over a holiday weekend, we just wish all of you, from all of us here at Working Ranch Radio Show and the Working Ranch Magazine, a very blessed, safe, and happy holiday season. And it's a time of the year where we just really have some time to be thankful for what we have as we're closing up a year. And nevertheless, any year that's out there, it always has its struggles, but it always has some things that we can be very, very thankful for. And this year is no different than that. And so from all of us here, we wish you the very blessed and happy, safe Christmas and New Year's season. And our program, as we continue here today, we are counting down the top 12 shows of 2023. Last week, we started with shows 12, worked down to number 9. This week, we're starting at 8 and working down to 5. In the previous episode, we hit the show ranked number 8, episode 137, and now we're on to the show ranked number 7. And this was a show that kicked off 2023, and man, oh man, did it kick us off in good fashion. It was episode 100, entitled Why Junior Shouldn't Come Back to the Ranch. Yeah, just the title alone would make you want to go back and listen to this. And Dallas Mount, who is the CEO for Ranch Management Consultants, joined us on that show. He has been a regular contributor to our program on many different occasions as we've had him on to talk about things that just from every different shape and angle has been very informative. And this show was no different. You're going to hear just a snippet of this show. And folks, let me tell you right now, there was a lot more to this show than what we're going to be able to air for you here today. So here is the show ranked number 7 for 2023, episode 100, with Dallas Mount, entitled Why Junior Shouldn't Come Back to the Ranch.
I think an interesting question to ask is, if we want our kids to someday lead this business, what do we need to do? What do they need to do to help them become equipped so that they're best qualified to lead this business in the future? And so looking at it that way, right? So if we're looking at bringing on a senior level partner into our business, what kind of things would we look for in that person and in their skills? So that might bring us to the show topic a little bit about, maybe why junior shouldn't come home. Okay? And I think where I'm coming from that is, if the kids are at a stage now where maybe they've gone out of high school, maybe they went off and got a degree for a couple years, a technical degree. Maybe they went to a 4-year program. Maybe they just graduated high school and went to work for the neighbor down the road for a year or two. When is the right time to say, hey, we'd love to have you back in this business? And I think if you're looking at it from that standpoint of how do we build the people that are best equipped to lead this business into the future, then in my opinion, it's probably not right to bring the kids into the business just 2 or 3 or 4 years after being gone, especially if they haven't had some really significant experiences. And I don't think going to a 4-year school, right? So like if you grew up on this place and, you spent your evenings and weekends working on the family place, and then you went away to a 4-year school, and maybe you came back over the Christmas, over the summers, and now you're done with that. I don't think that's the right time to say, yep, there's a spot for you here. Come on back. I just don't think those people have developed the skills and the perspective and had the opportunities to stretch their wings they need to at that point. So my suggestion to the ranches that we work with is to delay that homecoming for a while.
Yeah. And I think we're kind of dabbling into a couple different subjects in a way that's all tied together in terms of pushing this down to getting this available, ready to go to the next generation. But it's a tough subject for mom and dad, because if you're in a family that has more than one sibling, more than likely, it's not just as simple as passing it down to junior. And I think that really weighs on mom and dad's or granddad and grandma's mind quite a bit. Do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that deals with a whole host of a lot of the conversations we have in our executive link program. And these aren't easy conversations. I've got a few thoughts to share with you. One of those thoughts is the easiest thing to do is to, if let's say there's 3 siblings, is to go a third, a third, and a third, right? That's the easiest thing to do. That almost always results in the ranch being divided. Right. So, I mean, we can all sit and say, well, my kids are going to ranch together, and when I'm gone, they're going to be holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Rarely does that work. right? So sometimes they put up with it till mom and dad are either gone or out of the picture enough that they have the control to do with it. But it almost always results in the ranch being divided at some point. And I'm not saying that's a terrible thing. I mean, the matter of fact is at some point, the ranch will probably be divided.
Yeah.
Right. But do you want to have that happen on the transition year that you're doing? So if you want an alternative, then the alternative is to make it clear before the transition event occurs that this is our intent. We are going to give the land entity, whatever it is, we're going to give that intact to the person who returns. And in order to make that work, we're probably going to have some other assets somewhere else. They're probably not going to be of equal value, but they might be an insurance policy. They might be a set of mutual funds somewhere. They might be another business that you've built over the years that you can give to the non-returning heirs. But to make this happen, it has to be planned for all along. And so what that means is taking profits from the business. Now that assumes that there's profits. So first of all, you got to set the business up to be profitable. But then when there are profits, to not stick them all back into the business, right? And that's so tempting to do because when there are profits, we've got a laundry list of all these capital projects that we want to do. But you need to be disciplined enough to take a portion of those profits and to say, okay, we're going to put them over here or do this with them so that there is something else to give to the non-returning ranch heirs.
Yeah. Just a couple things, Dallas, we were talking about at the break there, and you wanted to touch on. We do have just a little bit of time here, but that was a couple things here in terms of some timeline, scalability, and some of those concepts. Hit those real quick.
Sure. There's a lot of things to get in this conversation today, and we're not going to be able to hit it all, but a couple more things to consider. Number one, if you're going to add another family to the business needs to be of a reasonable scale to support that. Our target is for every $400,000 in gross product a business produces, it can support one FTE, right? So if you're looking at your ranch and you guys are doing $1 million in gross a year, gross product, now you have to look at our material to see how we identify that. Your gross product, then that means that business could support 2 full-time employees, right? It meets that target of 400,000. Too often we see businesses that are barely scraping to support one family, and now they're trying to add a second to it. So let's just be real about the scalability of that. Now, that doesn't mean when Junior comes back, maybe we can say, hey, we want to invite you back, but we're not at the scale to do that. But we hope that in 5 years, you'll help be able to grow our business to that, right? That's fair. But I just think we need to be real with those things when we sit down and consider it. Mm-hmm. The second thing I want to bring on to folks, and this came from a group of EL alumni that shared an article with me that was out of I think it was the New Yorker magazine. And it said, your management decline is coming sooner than you think. Right? And it was about CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and the decade of life of the leader in those businesses. And it was really hard on those people that are past their 50s in terms of the decade of life. Mm-hmm. Well, you think about ranches, right? Many ranches are transitioning leadership of that ranch till somebody's in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s.
Yep.
Right. Well, so I just want to encourage people to think or to let them know the transition of leadership in your business should happen sooner than you think. Mm-hmm. Right. If you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, I'm in my 60s and I've just got this thing figured out, it's probably time to seriously start the transition leadership in that business. And if you wait another 5 years, it's probably too late. Right. I mean, so how do you do that? It doesn't mean it has to happen all at once. Right. It's not a walk in one day and you're the boss and walk in the next day and Junior's the boss. Right. It's, how can we give them pieces of this so that within 5 years they're equipped to lead the whole thing. Right. But I would just encourage people that transition of leadership in your business needs to happen sooner than you think. By the time somebody's in their 40s, they really should be controlling the decision making in it. So that's just my thoughts.
And there was just so much in that interview. We shared with you just snippets and bits and pieces of that conversation that we had with Dallas Mount on why Junior shouldn't come back to the ranch again. A play on words, as you heard there. And really, it was just how can we prepare Junior so that they do want to come back to the ranch and how that would work. A great conversation that aired January 6th of 2023, episode 100. It's what kicked off this past year. And man, oh man, was it a good program program to get the year kicked off. Now, I'd also mentioned that we do have some honorable mention programs that I'd like to bring up from time to time. Speaking of Dallas Mount, we did episode 125. I'll throw in the honorable mention category that aired in July of this year. It was Principles Over Practice, and a great program there that I'd encourage you to go back and listen to as well. Stay with us. We're going to take a break. We're working down the list. We'll get to number 6 and 5 coming up in the next few segments. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Nothing delivers a better return on investment like cattle health. Set up the next generation for lifetime performance with Zinpro Avela 4. Achieve reproductive success in your herd with a 20% increased conception rate and a 16-day tighter calving interval. Calves from cows supplemented with Zinpro have stronger immunity and 28 more pounds at weaning. Help protect your profits by partnering with Zinpro.
We are counting down the top 12 shows of 2023 of the Working Ranch Radio Show. This is part 2 of a 3-part series of programs. Last week we started at number 12 and worked on down to number 9. Today it's 8 through 5, and next week it'll be the top 4 shows of 2023. Hi, I'm Justin Mills, and we are glad to have you joining us on our program as we are now on to number 6. And definitely the markets was a subject we hit from time to time throughout 2023, as we do in most of the years. But this one was a little bit different because we were actually looking at more of the global beef supply outlook and why it's supportive to our future domestic markets. It was episode 123 that aired in June 24th of this past year with Brett Stewart, who is with Global Agri Trends, a great program that had a lot of useful information. And again, folks, I'm going to say it, we are airing just a portion of that show, and if you hear something in that sparks your interest, you will want to go back and listen to episode 123 on why global beef supply outlook is supportive to our future domestic markets. It was the show ranked number 6 in 2023. Let's take a listen. A lot of optimism you feel in the markets, and we've heard that. We've heard the outlook is looking like for our markets here, but let's look at this from a global standpoint just to start. And you really see a lot of optimism in this market going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting, Justin, when you look around the world, and we're all aware of what's going on in the U.S. We went through a drought. We've liquidated almost 2 million beef cows. We're starting to see the prices lift. But when you look around the global markets at what's going on, it's interesting. We are in a spot here, and I've been doing this for most of the last 20 years. I've never seen a situation like this. But when I look out at what's going on in Brazil, Brazil has aggressively killed females to supply the Chinese market. China's a whole different ball of wax. We can talk about that here in a minute. But Brazil has overkilled their herd to try and fulfill orders and keep beef going to China. As a result, they're in a spot where their female herd, I think, is tight. Now, in the global markets, we don't have data. We don't have a USDA in Brazil doing what our USDA does. So everything's guessing. And that's what I've made a living on, is guessing what's going on in the markets in China, supplies out of Brazil, Australia, etc. Long story short, due to our weather pattern and the inverse of our weather pattern in Australia, as well as what's going on in Brazil, we are expecting that the combined slaughter rates, total slaughter out of Australia plus Brazil plus the U.S., we've got that slaughter down 10% from 2023 to 2027. And so we're in a spot here where 3 of the biggest global beef exporters on earth are going to be moving through tight supplies over the next 4 years. And I'm not just talking about what we're hearing on calves now or what I think they're going to do next year. From a global basis, we've got support here for years out.
When you talk about this export market and our global market, let's put it into perspective as far as what that does. How much of an effect do we see from the global market on our U.S. market? I know, and maybe I'm not phrasing that question right, but I feel like sometimes we're really consumed about our domestic market here in the U.S., and it is a big part of our industry. So I don't want to downplay that, but at the same time, I don't think we quite understand, or at least I don't quite understand, really the implications that we see from that global beef market as a whole and its effect on us here in the U.S.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, Justin. So yeah, when you're sitting there on the ranch, you say, oh, the price that those Japanese pay for beef tongues is a long ways from what I get paid for my calves, right? And there's a lot of interactions and transactions in between those two. So you can look at it pretty simply this way. Exports on a tonnage basis, we export about 10% of our beef production. About 10% of the beef pounds goes out of the country. Now, I run a little metric here. I take export dollars as a percent of the fed steer value. That export dollars as a percent of the fed steer value 10, 15 years ago, it was about 10%, about the same as the volume. Today, it's well over 20%. So we export 10% of our production and over 20% of our value.
Okay.
And that's just happened in the last 10, 15 years. I'll tell you, it is shocking. And I haven't been to China since COVID, but 2019, I was over there 3 times. I've been to China pretty much every year for the last 20 years. And what's happened just in China alone is pretty shocking. And to see that beef demand come on, I mean, for years, I'd go to China and eat pork every meal. Or if I ate beef, it was old dairy cow beef, some real lean beef, and they'd boil it, boiled beef. The last 8 years in China, every restaurant, you go through those big malls in Beijing or Shanghai or Guangzhou, every restaurant has a picture of white fat marbled beef in the window. And it is, I don't know how to explain it. It's like cell phones or cars. It is the new thing in China. And so historically, we used to sell a lot of beef into North Asia, North America and North Asia, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Korea. That was the majority of our beef. Well, selling beef to Japan and Korea, they had a pretty cozy agreement how they allocated the cuts. And then China comes into the market. And all I can say for a cattle guy, it's kind of like if you've ever been at the sale barn and there's 2 guys buying cull cows.
Yeah.
You've been there, right, Justin? Yeah. 2 guys. And you're watching cull cows sell going, I kind of feel like I'm getting pillaged here. I feel like something's going on. What happens when that 3rd guy walks in and starts bidding? Then you find out I'm getting a fair price. And that's what happened when China came into the global markets. All of a sudden, Japan and Korea just flat could not keep up. And what we've seen just here recently, Japan is the one least able to step in the ring and bid with those guys. And so China coming into the market really increased the value of our export dollars.
Yeah. How active is Australia and Brazil trying to hit that China market? I mean, are we all 3 hard competing on China?
Yeah, Brazil's the biggest supplier by a mile.
Oh, really?
They're supplying the most beef, Uruguay, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand. But here's the deal. When you talk about grain-fed beef, and I told you those pictures all have white fat marbled beef. Now, all those restaurants don't have white fat marbled beef, but all the pictures are. White fat marbled beef is only produced in the U.S., in Canada, and about 30% of Australia. And so in that Chinese market, there's a lot of Australian beef, Brazilian beef going in that's $1.50 a pound cheaper than ours. The highest price imported beef into China month in, month out is the U.S., and it's by a wide margin. And so we're in a unique spot. When I look at global beef production, if I go back to 2000, the year 2000, 23 years ago, the total production of grass-fed beef in the world has increased about 4.5 million tons. The increase in water buffalo, that's out of India, that's increased 3 million tons. The total supply of grain-fed beef on the planet in 2023 versus the year 2000, it's going to be almost the same. So think about that. So you can't just look at global beef supplies. These are different products. So in 23 years, we've added 1.8 billion people to the planet. We've added 43 trillion in global GDP. And 2023 and next year, 2024, the world's going to have almost the identical amount of grain-fed beef that we did 23 years ago. That's because of our liquidation and Canada's liquidation. We were up about 1 million tons in 2022. But this global market for grain-fed beef is truly incredible.
The U.S. is an importer of beef. And so talk about that element of our market.
Yeah, we're now the number 2 importer of beef behind China. China's now surpassed us. So in terms of imports, and I went down this road, I'm from the cattle producer standpoint of, I'm with you. Why are we importing beef? We produce the best beef in the world, right? You kind of got to go back through history. And I worked for a few years for the U.S. Meat Export Federation in Denver. And if you go back to the history of why we export and what these markets do, look at Japan. You have to go back, clear back into the 1980s and 1990s when we really opened up Japan and started exporting beef. Those Asian markets eat different cuts than we do. They love short plates. Most people don't know what a short plate is. It's the same thing as a pork belly on a steer. Okay. It's basically that belly on a steer. It's real fatty. They like chuck rolls, even brisket, some of those fattier cuts, short ribs, things that we just really didn't utilize in full. those North Asian markets love. And so one thing that happened over time is that's a lot of the cuts that would end up in our trim pile. We would take short plates and navels and short ribs and some of those things. A lot of that would go into trim and it would be ground for hamburger. Mm-hmm. Well, what happens with imports is all of a sudden we say, hey, we got buyers over here that'll pay $3, $4, $5 a pound for these cuts. Let's go ahead and ship them out. We tighten our trim supply. And in return, we end up importing beef, whether it's from Canada, Mexico, Australia, for $1.50 a pound less. And so really in that trade, we're upgrading those cuts. We're going and finding the highest bid in the world for every cut. Mm-hmm. And so as a beef producer, I want every cut from my steer to go to the highest buyer on earth. Now, what that did, it's tightened our lean supply here. And so we do have lean supply coming in, and virtually all of our imports are coming in as 90% grinding beef. Mm-hmm. That comes in, it gets blended with the 50-50. We make lean patties. Now, as a rancher, I say, well, I used to hate it when I'd take cull cows to the auction and get 32 cents a pound. And I'd say, if we could shut off these imports, my cull cows wouldn't be 32 cents a pound. Yeah. That's a little harder argument to make today when cull cows are $1.10 plus per pound. Right? We simply do not have enough. We simply do not have enough. And there's a couple of things to consider. You could say, well, in a perfect world, we would export but not import. And that would give us maximum demand for our product. Well, you're not going to get any trade deals done if you say we want to export, but we're not willing to import. Yeah. And it's the same for our partners as well. You know, the door kind of swings both ways. But what's good news for us is those imports really have a small sized impact compared to the outsized impact of our exports. And so as a producer, like I say, you want to sell every pound of beef for the highest value anywhere in the world. Hamburger is our lowest cost product. It is it's the cheapest product we make. And so in effect, yeah, we allow those imports in, we export. And I think there's some room for concern about imports. I get a little nervous when I see USDA approving Paraguay for import based on a risk assessment that they done a few years ago, like 8 years ago. And we have to be careful. We need to protect this industry from disease. And I'm all about that. And I think we need to be very careful and we need to scream when we need to scream about the safety of imports. But when we're talking about this Canadian beef coming in, Australia, Mexico, we've got pretty good safety profiles in place. Disease risk is pretty low. Yeah, that stuff comes. But like I say, it's kind of a hard argument to make when cull cows and cull bulls are up in that $1.10, $1.20 range.
That was just a portion of the show ranked number 6 in 2023. It was episode 123 on why global beef supply outlook is supportive to our future domestic markets. Brett Stewart with Global Agri-Trends was our guest, and we just tapped into a part of that conversation that we had there. I appreciated his perspective, his view, and his knowledge that he's had over many years of looking at this from an economist standpoint. A great subject. If you are in the ranching industry and you're raising beef, this is a show you need to go and listen to. Episode 123, the show ranked 6th in 2023. Well, stick around. Coming up after the break, we're going to get into the show ranked number 5 for the year. And also the Captain Tim O'Byrne and meteorologist Don Day will be stopping in. Stay with us. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. As we continue our countdown of the top 12 shows of 2023, we are down and working on number 5 in this segment, and we are going to be joined by Rick Machen of the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management as I caught up with him in episode 131 entitled Skills Needed for Today's Ranch Manager. It aired on August 19th of this past year, and it really stemmed from the idea of knowing that we do have a lot of folks listening and that are both managing ranches or wanting to be a ranch manager. So this was a show where we addressed that subject on skills needed for today's ranch manager. A great conversation we had with Rick Machen of the King Ranch Institute, episode 137. The show ranked number 5 in 2023.
I think that getting experience and exposure, whether they go to college, and then I think it's a great thing if the family can afford it, go get a job and work in the industry elsewhere, work in finance, work in another segment of the beef industry other than cow-calf, work in a feed yard, maybe work for a packer. I think that diversity of experience only adds to the toolbox of a person that's going to either eventually go back to the family ranch and manage that or manage for other ownership. And so it gets back to our original discussion about change. So things are changing so fast outside or away from the ranch that if we grew up with Dad and we always did it Dad's way for the reasons Dad did it, those reasons may not be valid anymore. So I think that breadth of exposure is critical. We require candidates to have 3 to 5 years minimum beyond the bachelor's degree before they apply to come to our program. We think that maturity is important, the demonstration that they're passionate about the industry, but again, that broader exposure to different segments of the industry only makes them more well prepared to be a manager and participate in our program.
Very good. Rick, you've got about 3 things or 3 kind of umbrella things. Within each of those things are some subcategories and specific skills. So let's get into the first one that you identified, and that is tactical skills. What are you meaning by that?
Yeah. Well, again, Justin, it's great to be with you on the show, and I've been looking forward to this discussion. And tactical may not be the most appropriate word. It's just a word that I use. But those skills are the day-to-day chores that we all grew up doing. The natural resource management, to include soil, forages, water, the natural resources, and then the animal management component of that, the day-to-day grind of taking care of the cattle, the sheep, the livestock, other domestic livestock, horses, whatever it might be. And then the third part of that is the infrastructure maintenance, how to take care of roads, fences, water infrastructure, all that kind of stuff, keep it in good repair and working. So the things that under the tactical skills umbrella that I think a ranch manager has to have command of, the things that most of us that grew up in a farmer ranch environment, we grew up watching dad or grandpa or aunt or uncle, whatever, and we just learned by doing. I think today's ranch manager, to be effective, needs to know how to do those things and do them well. And more importantly, know what it takes to get those things done. You know, managers of large complex ranches, businesses don't have the luxury typically from the time standpoint of being out there, you know, being horseback every day or 3 days a week, but they need to be able to do those skills and demonstrate to the folks that are working for them that they can do them and do them well, but they know what it takes to get it done. I think that only helps them command the respect of the people that they're supervising to know, hey, not only can I do it, I'm willing to get out there, be there in the Brandon pen, be there at weaning, checking heifers, moving irrigation pipe, whatever the case might be. So those tactical skills are absolutely huge. And as we look at candidates that are applying to the Institute, we pretty much expect them, because we're only a 2-year Master of Science program, we expect them to come with those skills. We don't have the time or the geographic diversity of knowledge that it would take to completely train a person to go manage a ranch anywhere in the 48 states.
One of the things as you were talking about tactical skills, you said you as a ranch manager, you kind of need to know this stuff, because some of that stuff may be what the boots on the ground, if you have somebody working for you, might be doing. And if you really don't know how to do it, there might be a little sliver of respect that kind of goes away, which leads us to our next skill, and that is managing people.
Yeah, for sure. You know, as we have the opportunity to visit with large managers of large complex ranches or ranches of any size across the country, and you visit with them and say, what are your challenges? What on a day-to-day basis, what's the biggest challenges? When I came to the Institute, I thought those challenges would be the natural resources, livestock, marketing, animal health, those kind of things. Not so. Almost to the person, when you visit with today's ranch managers, communication across the ranch is going to be always going to be in the top 3, as is people management. And people management skills, the really good managers have got it figured out how to effectively manage the people that are working for or with them. And that may be managed fellow family members, or it may be managing a whole fleet of employees that are not related to ownership. But effective people management is absolutely key. We all appreciate how difficult it is to find labor today, and especially in a ranch environment or a feed yard where you're asking them to be out in the elements in the wintertime. in the heat of the summer. It's not the most comfortable working environment. It's a phenomenal lifestyle. It's a phenomenal experience, but the ability to recruit good people and retain those people and develop those people. And I think it's a continuous process for all of us as the manager, as the owner, or as an employee. To be really good, we have to be a lifelong learner. And just the ability to manage those people, get the best out of them and have the best for them is an absolute requirement.
Well, I hate to cut it short, but the next subject we were getting into was the third leg in that stool of the skills needed for today's ranch manager. And if you want to find out what that is, then go to episode 131, Skills Needed for Today's Ranch Manager. It was a great conversation with Rick Machen of the King Ranch Institute for Ranch Management. They've been doing that for a lot of years, training up ranch managers. I appreciated his insight and his knowledge in this and his expertise to give us a great program there and some great information in that. Ranked number 5 is episode 131, aired August 19th of this past year, where we're going to put a halt on the countdown for today's program. Next week, we will be getting into shows ranked 4 down to number 1. But coming up in the next segment, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be by, as well as meteorologist Don Day. Stick with us. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I was just thinking there through the break and the fact that, one of the reasons that we do this top 12 countdown of the shows of 2023, not only to finalize and finish out the year, but also it's a good way to just rehash some of those programs that were really impactful. And for myself, as I go back and pull out some of those clips, I'm just finding that there were some really great shows, not only in the top 12 that we're highlighting here in these last 3 shows of 2023, but many other shows. And I would just encourage you, even though you might have heard that show and say, well, I don't need to go back and listen, I'd encourage you to go back to some of these shows and listen to them again, because they are some very, very good shows, some good guests that had a lot of great information to share with us. Well, speaking of good guests, the Captain Tim O'Byrne is standing by. Let's listen in to see what he's got for us on this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Well, the blessed season is upon us. I hope your winter is going good. Not lots of family get-togethers and good times. Cattle looking good. I hope you have a great holiday. NFR is over here. Vegas is pretty quiet now, and gives us a chance to reflect on what all happened. That was a pretty crazy rodeo season and a great wrap-up. Christine and I are glad to get to visit with you and Milo down at Cowboy Christmas. That was really good. And I took in another event. I actually checked it out online live. It was the Diamonds in the Desert Premier Horse Sale. And I got to tell you about Lot 18, a gelding. I mean, these are amazing horses, and they can work and do all kinds of stuff. And one of them went for $72,000, and another one followed not long after for $74,000. I got to tell you, that blew my mind. $74,000 for a working gelding. There's some just great, amazing horses and great horse folks out there that can make those kind of horses. And things are looking up. So here's to 2024. Hope everything's looking good for you folks. And Justin, we'll catch you later.
All right, thanks, Captain. And yeah, like he said there, we had the opportunity to catch up while we were down there, his wife and I, and Milo and I, and it was good to see them. But I tell you, with as late as the finals was this year, it really kind of almost put me in a bind of getting things done before Christmas this year. But it was a good time, and it was a good opportunity to see the captain and his wife as well. Well, let's switch gears now just a bit and take a look at our long-term weather. Joining us is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, we always do try to get and look at a long-term weather forecast on our program here, but with the many variables that we're seeing in the weather elements that make up our weather across the country, it's been pretty tough here as of late.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, and we're looking at these moving parts moving against each other and really making it very difficult. Even our best, highest resolution, fastest computer models, complete with even the latest in artificial intelligence trying to help us forecast the weather, really getting past 2 or 3 days has been really, really hard. And a lot of reason for that is that the El Nino out in the Pacific is reaching its peak strength right now. That's starting to affect the weather. That's one reason why we've finally seen some good precipitation over the last couple of weeks in the Southern Plains, California last week, doing very well with some good rainfall. That is also working with what has been some really cold weather over in Asia and Siberia. Not a lot of folks know about. We all know it's been pretty warm across most of the North American continent, Canada included here in the month of December so far. But it has been extremely cold in parts of Eastern Europe, Russia, Siberia. Earlier in this past week, it dropped to 0 Fahrenheit in Beijing, China. That doesn't happen very often. That was a record. And a lot of that cold air now is pushing into the Pacific, on the western edge of the Pacific. And all of that, the warmth from the El Nino, the cold coming off of Siberia, there's just a lot to track, and that's causing a lot of variability in the modeling.
Well, and I know for our area, and generally speaking across the country, there has been some moisture across the southern half of the country, but it's been a pretty mild winter so far, and at some point that's probably going to have to change.
Yeah, what we're going to be watching is that colder air moving across the Pacific into the continental United States in about a week or so. Now, it's going to get modified. You take that Arctic air off the continents and you put it across the water. Well, that's going to temper the Arctic air a little bit. But that Arctic air will interact with the warmer water temperatures of the ocean, causing some storms to form across the North Pacific. And we're also looking at probably a movement of the colder air from the other side of the hemisphere to this side. And we expect that especially around the 5th and the 10th of January. So as we go into the new year, some of this very mild weather we've been enjoying across the United States during the month of December, well, it's going to be feeling more like winter, especially in the central and the eastern parts of the U.S.
You bet. All right, Don, well, appreciate it. I'll let you go here, and thanks for joining us here with a look at our long-term weather, and wishing you all the very best here this Christmas weekend, and as you prepare for this coming New Year's as well. We look forward to talking to you next week.
Sounds good. You too as well.
All right. And again, that is meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. His website can be found at dayweather.com. That's where you can go and find if you're interested in purchasing some weather equipment, various things like that, or you want to tune in each and every morning to his daily video podcast. You can find the link from his website at dayweather.com. Stick around. We'll put a wrap on this week's show when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Just a quick shout out of one more show that I had here on my honorable mention list. It was episode 113 that aired in April of this last year, entitled Land Trust, Capturing the Recreational Value of Your Land. And I was interviewing the CEO for Land Trust. It's a company that basically has set up similar to like a bed and breakfast concept, but you as the ranch owner or the landowner can go through them and they'll negotiate those terms, and you have a lot of power and a lot of say in how that goes down. And if you ever have been interested in how you can capture some of the recreational value of your land, that's a program you might want to go back and listen to. Again, that was episode 113. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine. It's branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you would like to get a hold of me, it's pretty simple. You can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Well, again, on behalf of all of us at Working Ranch Radio Show and Working Ranch Magazine, we wish all of you a very blessed and happy Merry Christmas. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.